The ancient wonders of the world. Monuments created from mountains of gigantic stone whose sole purpose seems to be to connect to the very heavens and to last into eternity. But how did ancient humans even create such magnificent wonders of stone? How did they carve and move such massive stone blocks from quarries across miles and miles of varying terrain and then stack them so neatly and precisely into place that they have stood the test of time? Many theories have been proposed, from ancient mega machines to superhuman giants, ancient alien spaceships, magic, and lost super science. There are even some ancient stories passed down from generation to generation that relate to the use of a very basic force that we are familiar with and experience every day: sound. The stories relate that sound is powerful enough to overcome gravity itself, rendering the massive stone blocks nearly weightless or even able to float in the air. Modern science shows that acoustic levitation is indeed real, but could sound ever be employed to move objects on such a megalithic scale? But what would such sound sources even look like? Would they be ordinary instruments? How huge would they have to be in order to generate such prodigious energies? Could they resemble these massive drums? Take a listen to the pulsating sounds that these drums create. So the energy coming from those drums are quite impressive. So now let's take a look at these huge trumpets. These are called ragdons, and they can they can measure up to about 9 feet long, plus, with diameters, in diameters, openings about 1 foot. Some of them take about more than one person to carry. So take a listen to the sound of the ragdown. So very powerful sound. So what it shows us that with the right instruments, human beings can produce a lot of energy. Even these gongs of enormous size could probably produce very strong, deep resonances that could travel for miles. But even still, could even a cacophony of instruments of this size and weight be able to produce vibrations that could move, let alone levitate, a huge stone like this one? Okay, so this is a very interesting article from alternative science literature. It's known as the Tibetan stone levitation. It discusses the travels of a Dr. Jarl, who allegedly witnessed a group of monks lifting heavy stone slabs up the side of a steep cliff in order to build a temple. Now, apparently this was done using only the sound from a cacophony of gigantic musical instruments that were laid out in specific geometric patterns. What's interesting about this story is the specific and detailed information it gives, down to the very size and shapes of the instruments. Unlike most of the rather anecdotal sonic levitation stories, the relative size of the stone is given, along with the number and size of the musical instruments, and also even the travel time of the block in the air is chronicled. According to Bruce Cathy, who's an expert in what is called the world energy grid, he analyzed this story and found that the measurements seemed to reflect sacred earth geometries as well as light and gravity harmonics associated with the unified field theory. It is believed that by encoding this information into their macrosonic levitation layout, that the monks were able to generate and sustain a focused sound field that was strong enough to overcome gravity on both a practical and megalithic level. And right here we can see some information pertaining to the drum and horn proportions, the musical instruments that we used in this levitation feat. So as we can see, the largest drum was about 1 meter in diameter, so that's about 3 feet. Still seems a little bit smaller than some of the drums that we saw earlier, which seemed to be almost about 1.5 to about 2 meters in diameter. It also relates that there were 6 ragdown trumpets, and as we saw earlier, the ragdown trumpets can be as much as 9 meters long. So on the next page here we see again the layout. On the left part here we see kind of like a top view. You see that the instruments and the monks were laid out in the type of spoke wheel pattern on the left, to the left of the block. And to the right of the diagram, we can see a side view. It's in how the stone allegedly was caught up in the sound field and was levitated in a large arc towards the top of the cliff. So at present, as far as we know at least, acoustic levitation is limited to the micro level, not referring to the metric prefix, but just that it's limited to smaller objects such as solid and foam balls. So the technique usually works by having some type of sonic emitter at the bottom, usually ultrasound, and directly over it having some kind of a curved reflector made out of solid reflective material. But what this does is reflect the source wave back onto itself, resulting in an interference pattern. This interference pattern results in the production of what we call nodes, which are regions of low sonic energy, as well as antinodes, which are regions of maximum sonic energy. Now, outer space, it is said that these objects will settle, any particles to be levitated will settle in the node regions, whereas on Earth it will settle just beneath the node region. So it's kind of similar to a river, a flowing river, and you get like debris build up in the kind of slower moving areas of the river that have the least water pressure. By either having an ultrasonic speaker and in place of a reflector over the top, or by having several additional sonic generators on the bottom, you still end up with interference patterns, but by varying the phase, you can move the object in different directions, up and down, and even left to right. So the question is this what the Tibetan monks were doing in the earlier levitation story? Engineers state that that to levitate a large stone in a similar manner to this microsonic containerless processing, we would need quarter-mile long reflectors in very, very low frequencies. Needless to say, constructing a quarter-mile long reflectors is impractical on Earth. But what if we could use the Earth's atmosphere instead? The various layers of Earth's atmosphere have varying densities, with the troposphere being the lowest and most dense. So what if we could utilize the troposphere as the upper reflector in our microsonic levitation? If so, then all we would really need to do is produce the appropriate sonic input. Musical instruments by themselves will not produce enough energy regardless of how large they are. But if we could couple and amplify this input sonic energy using the alleged earth harmonics mentioned earlier, could we produce a standing wave of such intensity and focus that it would overcome gravity? We would essentially be using the earth as a giant loudspeaker casing, which would greatly amplify certain frequencies through resonance and hence produce a standing wave. The next task would be to derive the specific resonant frequency modes of this earth loudspeaker casing, and then reproduce those frequencies with our sonic generators. So I apologize for the crudity of this illustration, but I just put it here to kind of help visualize the proposed technique of utilizing the earth as a giant loudspeaker and using the Earth's atmosphere in order to produce a standing wave. So if you envision on the ground the giant musical instruments or sonic generators producing high energy sound reflected up into, or that's sent up into the Earth's atmosphere to be reflected back down from the troposphere, creating an interference pattern. And with that interference pattern, we would have the nodes or sub-node regions where you have a large stone, a megalithic stone that could float in that region. And so again, by having different instruments underground producing frequencies that are out of phase, it seemed it would be feasible to be able to move the stone in different directions, up and down, left or right. Because of course, if you can't move it around, then it doesn't really make really that much difference to levitate it, unless you can actually control the direction of movement. And so here is just an example or a diagram just comparing the two systems, the macrosonic and the microsonic system. So again, just kind of looking at kind of vision on the left part of the diagram, where you have the generation of sound energy being traveled or being sent to the bowl-like cavity under the stone, being reflected from the bowl-like cavity and directed up into the Earth's atmosphere to be reflected back down from the troposphere, creating the interference pattern and thus the nodal regions where the stone would float. And then to the right of the diagram is just basically showing or kind of comparing that to how acoustic levitation works on the micro level. Alright, so anyone who's studied alternative science has probably heard of Nikola Tesla's wireless world energy system. In it, he proposed to send usable electricity throughout the Earth's surface and atmosphere using his magnifying transformer at Wardenclyffe. So this energy would be sent throughout the Earth without the aid of wires. Now, many engineers seem to think this idea is practically impossible because of the inverse square law, which reduces radiation intensity and would severely limit the amount of electricity that could travel a significant distance throughout the Earth using this method. This reduction is inversely proportional to the square of the distance from the radiation source. In that case would be the magnifying transmitter. The inverse square law affects not only electromagnetic radiation, but also sonic radiation. However, as this document points out, reflective surfaces within a sound field could create standing waves and resonance within that field due to the reflection that they would create. And so we get standing waves and resonance in regions within the sound field where the inverse square law would not apply. So this next document discusses the interaction between light waves or electromagnetic waves and sound in the Earth's atmosphere. It states that when light waves interact with sound waves in the atmosphere, the light waves are modulated by the sound waves. This causes the scattering and refraction of the light. But what's most interesting is that the light wave, consisting of photons that travel in wave-like pattern, travel at considerably higher speed than the neutral particles in the sound wave. As a result of this, energy flows from the photons to the neutral particles. Now this is really interesting because not only does it seem to point to the unified fields, but if indeed energy can travel in this way from light to sound, then it would be reasonable to assume that this energy transfer would be maximized at certain resonant harmonic frequencies. For example, since red light vibrates at a frequency of 8 times 10 to the 14th hertz, would a powerful sound wave at this subharmonic of 8 times 10 to the second or 8 times 10 to the first, etc., be able to maximize absorption of energy from this light? If so, with the visible spectrum being between 4 and 8 times 10 to the 14th hertz, this would give us a number of subharmonics to work with. Through theory and experimentation, we could find out which frequencies work best. We could even look at the subharmonic frequencies of the most energetic waves, which would be gamma rays. Gamma rays vibrate at 3 times 10 to the 19 hertz. Gamma rays are emitted from the sun during solar flare activity. Perhaps this is why the ancients were always looking into the heavens and coinciding certain activities with celestial events. Further, geometrics can also be used to greatly enhance sound. Many of us have probably heard of the Malta Hypogeum in Italy and the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, whose unique geometries can amplify even the smallest sounds. Now, the Earth is said to have a fundamental electrical resonance frequency of about 7.83 hertz. Tesla's system was supposedly tuned to resonate both electrically and sonically with this frequency and its harmonics. If this is true, then Tesla may have been looking for a way to tap into the unified fields when designing his equipment to resonate to the Earth's sonic and electrical frequencies, rather than simply throwing out large quantities of electricity into the air, hoping that it could be received. Looking at the world energy grid pattern and resonating the Earth with electrical and sonic energy might produce antinodes seen here in the form of the blinking dots. These regions would be regions of maximum electrical energy that could be practically harnessed at a much further distance than the inverse square law would allow. At these points, an antenna could either be erected to capture the electricity, or a power station could be erected that would take in the energy, amplify it, and then send it back out into the energy grid. So by resonating the Earth in this manner, we should be able to achieve far greater energy levels and potentials than we could ever achieve artificially. This will be done gradually through the constant input of energy at certain frequencies. This great energy could be used for a number of tasks, including levitation of huge objects. This energy would build up in a similar manner to how a child could push a heavily loaded swing to its near apex using properly timed pushes. So the energy would build up gradually. And as we recall in the Tibetan levitation story, it did actually take several minutes for that stone to actually move. So most likely, it probably took several minutes for the energy to build up to a sufficient level in order to lift the stone. Now, a really good question here is, would full levitation really even be needed to make the job of building a megalith easier? This document highlights the fact that of the tremendous energy required to construct the megaliths. Most of it was lost due to the heat of friction in just pushing and pulling the giant blocks of stone across the Earth's surface. So it would seem that by simply reducing the friction, you could vastly increase the work efficiency. Many ideas have been proposed relating to how the ancients reduced friction. Ideas ranging from pouring water over the Earth's surface, to compact the dirt, making it smoother, to wooden rollers, to seeds of fibrous vegetable roots. Certainly these methods may have been employed, but what about sound? Could sound vibrations also be used to reduce friction between the boulder and the Earth's surface? We've all seen vibrating objects like cell phones move across the surface like a table. This is known as acoustic lubrication. It occurs when vibration is introduces a fractional separation between the sliding surfaces. The size of the objects that can be affected in this manner is inversely proportional to the activating frequencies. High frequencies for smaller objects and lower frequencies for larger objects. The article gives the example of a 0.2 friction coefficient between two surfaces. If vibration is introduced that causes them to be in contact for only half of the time, then the friction coefficient would be reduced to 0.1, which is a 50% reduction. In other words, if a boulder of X weight required 100 people to pull it at a good clip, then a 50% friction reduction will require only 50 people to pull the same weight, or the same number of people could pull twice as much weight. Okay, so this here is an experiment that I devised to test the acoustic lubrication. So what I have here is about a 60-pound stone that's resting on top of the structure. The structure is a resonant structure. The resonator itself is made from a 17-inch diameter pizza pan. So it has very definite resonant tones. There's magnet stack in the very center, and placed over it is a solenoid. And so it functions basically as like a loudspeaker. The interaction between magnet and solenoid. And so when I activate it, of course, that produces vibrations that are controlled by a function generator and electronic driver circuit. All right, so right here, the device is not on, so there's no vibrations, and I just want to show how much force it takes to pull on the wooden slab without vibrations. So you can see here it's about 120 newtons. So now with vibrations, I'm gonna pull. So a steady pull to get the contraption moving takes about 50 newtons. So that's about a 58.3% reduction in the force that was needed to pull the object, pull the contraption with this 60-pound block on top of it. Now this here is basically the same experiment, only using about 40 pounds of weight, and I have the contraption. It's resting on wood, but it's actually resting directly on a piece of sheet metal. The function is a very smooth surface. So of course, with acoustic lubrication, you want to use as smooth a surface as possible. So this is how much force it takes to pull 40 pounds on top of the contraption without the vibrations. And now this would be the force with the vibrations. Okay, so with vibrations, it took 15 newtons as opposed to 32 and a half newtons without the vibrations. So that gives us about a 53.8% reduction. So in both cases here, the coefficient of friction and thus the force required to set the weight in motion was reduced by just over 50%. Now, if this could be scaled up to megalithic range, then a tempo block that requires 100 people to pull it under normal conditions will require only 50 people to pull it under acoustic lubrication. Or you can have the same number of people pull twice as much weight. So what I'd like to see is exactly how high up in weight I could go with the equipment that I have on hand. These experiments used a maximum of about 480 volts, but I have enough equipment to go up to about 1200 volts, and I have about 500 pounds of cement weights on hand. If it works with 500 pounds, then I will attempt 1000 pounds next to see how well acoustic lubrication works with heavier masses, and whether I would still get a reduction in the neighborhood of 50%, or if it would be greater or smaller. So even though acoustic lubrication is apparently possible, sonic levitation would still be the ideal. Not only would it enable us to escape friction altogether, but it will also allow us to elevate objects without cranes, ramps, or pulleys. But are the stories of levitation, like the Tibetan story, even true at all? And if so, can we turn this fringe pseudoscience into practical science? And how could we experiment to find out? The method I propose will be a biodome. With it, we could experiment in a sort of microcosm of the larger Earth atmosphere. With the exact dimensions of this biodome, we could calculate the resonant frequencies that would create the standing waves. The temperature and moisture of the air within would have to be strictly controlled. This would be much easier to do within the biodome than in the Earth's atmosphere. Since the dome's dimensions will obviously be smaller than that in the open Earth atmosphere, the standing waves that would result would be from shorter wavelengths or higher frequencies. Thus, the objects that could be lifted would most likely be smaller, but we would at least be able to have an easier time in determining the principles. Okay, so this last article I found online a number of years ago. I haven't been able to find it lately, so I was glad that I printed it out. It's called Egypt's Big Noises, and it discusses the differences of opinion between alternative theorists and more conventional archaeologists and Egyptologists, of course, concerning the construction methods of the ancients. Of course, conventional theorists find the idea of sonic levitation or lubrication highly unlikely, even absurd. Yet the ancient builders had a profound grasp of the properties of sound and resonance, as evidenced by the stone structures around the world. The article references and actually quotes a more open-minded Egyptologist who said that when the king rose to heaven, she's quoting the scriptures, that when the king rose to heaven, or whenever there was a rising or floating, it was accompanied by loud sounds. But were the sounds the causal factor, or were they only the byproduct of some other process or technique? And therein lies the mystery. And this is why we must research through experimentation. If and once we accomplish macrosonic levitation at the biodome level, We can then use the principles learned in an attempt to duplicate the results in the larger Earth's atmosphere so that we can go from this to that. What we're talking about here is a truly holistic science, a science that could revolutionize the way we generate and use energy. Energy that is vast, clean, and limitless. Levitation, travel to space, all will be made more cost effective than we ever dreamed possible.